The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Labour Party will be supporting this bill through continuing stages. Mr Speaker, one of the lessons from the global financial crisis is that regulators all around the world really became too lax in the regulation of the financial services sector following years of prosperity when people and regulators sort of assumed this would carry on forever. And it was really only after the collapse caused by some of the risky lending that took place in jurisdictions, mainly overseas in respect of derivative transactions, but also in New Zealand in terms of the some of the non-bank deposit takers, that the regulators and their masters, including parliaments, were sufficiently alert to the need to update regulation. Indeed, it's only posthumously that one of the leading academics in this field, Hyman Minsky, an American economist, his views have gained currency, and there is a reference, I think now in the language around these things, to the Minsky moment, and that's effectively the point when it all tipped over and cascaded downwards and imploded upon itself, when we had cascading failures in the financial sector, locking up the financial sector around the world. And why this is particularly important in the financial sector compared with some other sectors is that if a business unit fails in the non-financial sector, then the rest of the economy keeps working. But when the financial sector wheels stop turning, the rest of the economy stops as well, because financial intermediaries are important to the functioning of the whole economy, not just to the profitability of the financial sector itself. So Hyman Minsky's view of the world was that regulators have to constantly update financial regulation in order to keep the financial sector from embarking upon risky behaviour that puts at risk the operation of the financial services sector in a way which can impact upon the wider economy. And indeed, Hyman Minsky pointed out that the longer the period of settled prosperity, the greater the need there is for financial regulators to be staying ahead of the moves made by the financial services sector. And that's because the longer the period of prosperity, the dimmer memories are as to the last time there was a clean-out. And the dimmer the memories are as to what can be the consequences for both the financial services sector and the wider economy of too much risk-taking behaviour in respect to the financial services sector. He also made the point that the longer the period of financial security in the financial services sector, the greater the expectation is that next year the profits will be higher. And in order to have that building profit from year to year exponentially growing, the only way banks and other financial intermediaries can do it is generally, well actually not the only way, but a preponderance of later years of long periods of economic prosperity is risk-taking behaviour in respect of financial institutions. And how that manifests itself is that banks, in order to do those things, and non-bank deposit takers, embark upon things that aren't controlled because they do it around the outside of regulations, and therefore they're not caught by some of the prudential rules that apply under the status quo regulations. And so Hyman Minsky said, look, the regulator's always got to be keeping an eye on what's happening in the market, always got to be keeping ahead with these changes in practice on the part of the financial intermediaries in order to avoid against these risks becoming heightened, everything falling over at once, cascading failures leading to the financial sector grinding to a halt and effectively closing down other parts of the economy, in part because consumers who are lending money to these deposit takers are so hurt by the sudden shock of not being able to get their money out of these financial intermediaries, and they then themselves don't have money to spend in the economy, and you get into a declining economy and a deflationary spiral, or at least a recession. So that's what happened around the world at the end of 2008 and 2009, and as a consequence we have seen financial regulators around the world taking steps to minimise the risk of that happening again. And this bill is part of that. This isn't in respect of banks, it's in respect of non-bank deposit takers. And what it does is it imposes prudential requirements upon these non-bank deposit takers by incorporating prudential requirements that are already able to be applied by the Reserve Bank under the Reserve Bank Act 1989, pursuant to a new part that was introduced by this Parliament not so long ago, but the provisions of which have yet to be applied to the non-bank deposit taking sector, and that's what this bill does. It extends those prudential requirements through this bill. The Reserve Bank can now apply those prudential requirements to the non-bank deposit takers. Mr. Speaker, this is therefore worthy legislation, and that's why the Labour Party supports it. But, Mr. Speaker, and you would expect a but from me in the opposition, because there are so many buts to be given at the moment, but it really doesn't do anything substantial to overcome New Zealand's problems. We heard the Minister of Finance saying today that, New Zealanders are saving more. Actually, New Zealand debt, as he acknowledged quickly in the early part of his answer, has gone down by 0.2% in the 4 years since they came to government. The deficit and the trade deficit is projected to go out. 0.2% reduction in household debt, and that's at a time when, in recession, because people are losing confidence, they actually put their checkbooks away for a while and they don't buy as many TVs and cars and don't spend as much money on their house alterations, etc. And therefore, you would expect, if New Zealand's economy was performing relatively well, that we would have household debt going down by just more than just 0.2% in the last 4 years. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why we're losing so many people to Australia, including in our resource-rich area, the Taranaki, where you'd expect, if there was any part of New Zealand, if the drive to Australia was because of a resources boom, you'd have thought that they would be different to that trend, even if it was apparent elsewhere in New Zealand where they're not. Now, what does the Labour Party says is more important than the likes of this bill? We should be debating real pro-growth tax reform in this country. Does New Zealand need tax changes in order to put on a better footing investment in our productive sector rather than our speculative sector? I think we do. I think it's abundantly clear. The Treasury thinks we do. The Reserve Bank thinks we do. The IMF thinks we do. The OECD says, but the National Party refused to have a debate in this House as to whether we should be passing a capital gains tax. Absolutely necessary for the health of the New Zealand economy, but not at all on the National Party agenda. 0.2% reduction in household debt. We do need to transition to higher savings. We need more New Zealanders saving. We need a universal KiwiSaver scheme. Improving the regulation of non-bank deposit takers, it's a worthy thing to do. But if people aren't saving more money, then there's not going to be much more money in these non-bank deposit takers in order to be invested by people who, in order to be lent by those non-bank deposit takers to sections of the economy. So this bill does nothing to fix that. It doesn't change the way in which it doesn't change the. So it doesn't change the shape of where investment money is going into New Zealand. It doesn't increase the amount of investment money in the New Zealand economy, but it does further regulate the economy. So it's somewhat strange that we've got a national government. They think the answer to most things is further deregulation. I'm pleased that they see in this area that deregulation is not the answer and that there is a need for more regulation, but I do make the point that it doesn't lift New Zealand's economic fortunes in the way we need in order to stem that flow of so many New Zealanders overseas. 40% of them are now aged 18 to 30. It's a terrible loss of that resource from New Zealand, those people who don't think they've got hope and opportunity in New Zealand but instead go overseas. They're going because of New Zealand's problems, because the government's not discussing these other important issues. I'm going to run out of time to talk about how this bill doesn't affect the Treasury, but maybe Mr. Cosgrove or I hear the government is seeking leave for me to have an extension of time, so I'm happy to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Point of order.
Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
I seek leave for another 10-minute call in this debate, sir. In addition to the other, contributions that are made pursuant to standing orders.
Can I say that the member, of course, is perfectly entitled to seek leave of the House, but whether the House gives it to him is another matter. So I'm going to put the question: is there any objection to that course of action being taken? There is. I'm sorry, Mr. Parker. There is objection.
That's faster than usual.
I call the honourable member Todd McLean.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure.